Hey everyone, Doc B here, and I am here with Dr. Joseph Cooper. Man, I have known this guy for a very, very long time, and it's just so exciting to see where you are, what you've been up to, citing your articles, reading your articles, all of that. But we have yet to have a conversation, and I'm just really excited to be here. Dr. Joseph Cooper, he is the executive director of the New Balance Institute for Innovative Leadership in Sport. And he's also the CEO and he's also a professor at, can we start this over actually? Hey all, it's Doc B here, and I'm so excited because I have Dr. Joseph Cooper here today for an interview. Dr. Joseph Cooper, I've known him for a very long time. We were actually in grad school at the same time, and so I think maybe like 10, 15 years. I don't want to age us, right? I don't want to age us. But super excited for him to be here. And he is the director of the New Balance Institute for Innovative Leadership in Sport. And he also is a professor of sport management. Without further ado, yeah, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, your hometown, your team, your hobbies, just so we know a little bit about you and how you were able to get to where you are now? And I know you hold a lot of other leadership roles, so can you tell us a little bit more about those as well?
Absolutely. Great to see you, Dr. Butler. Excited to be here on your podcast to connect with your audience. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, but my parents moved to North Carolina shortly after I was born. So I always like to situate my upbringing within the context that Greensboro was the site of the birth of the college sit-in movement. So at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, which is the largest historically black college and university in the United States, in 1960, four African American male students sat at a Woolworth's restaurant, an all white Woolworth's restaurant, demanding to be served. And they were really challenging the segregation status quo of the day, even though Brown v. Board of Education had been passed 6 years prior. That was related to educational desegregation in public schools. The 1964, 65, and 68 Civil Rights Acts had not been passed, which was more designed to desegregate voting opportunities, access to public accommodations, as well as other benefits that all American citizens should enjoy. So I grew up in an environment that it was the vistitude of the civil rights movement. I played basketball and soccer growing up. My mother is an educator, is still working at a university. She previously worked in K through 12 education, so education was heavily emphasized in my life. My father was in the medical field. He was a psychiatrist, and he was from Liberia, West Africa. And I bring that up because my identity, I primarily identify as an African American, but also as a Liberian, as a descendant of family members who grew up in Liberia. And so that led to my African diasporic identity developing throughout my life. But yeah, I've always been a big fan of basketball, played basketball. Obviously, Michael Jordan is from North Carolina. He's very popular. North Carolina Tar Heels, Wake Forest, Demon Deacons, NC State Wolfpack, Duke University, Blue Devils. So college basketball is very big and popular in North Carolina. So I followed multiple teams growing up, but obviously Michael Jordan was the most impressionable. And so I ended up going to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Unlike Michael Jordan, I wasn't able to make the varsity team and did not have an illustrious professional career, but I always had an affinity for history, for sociology, which was one of my undergraduate majors. And at the time, sport management, sport administration, and sport leadership, they were not undergraduate options for me. Like they those majors didn't exist. So there was an exercise sports science major, but that was more anatomy, physiology, physical training, athletic training, physical therapy. And I was more interested in more the socio-cultural aspect of sport. So there was another major called Recreation Administration and Leisure Studies. So I did a dual degree in Recreation Administration and Leisure Studies with sociology. Started working in the Parks and Rec sector and worked at a YMCA as well as a Parks and Recreation department. Did some volunteering with athletics departments and even with some professional sports. But I had an advisor who told me, why don't you go back to graduate school and consider being an athletic director? And I said, oh, that sounds, interesting. So I ended up going back and doing my master's in sport administration at the University of North Carolina. And in that program, we were required to do a master's thesis. And I'll just give the short version. The first idea that I presented to my advisor, she just said, no, you're not doing that. You're not passionate about that topic. So I ended up changing it to focusing on black male student athletes and critical success factors for their athletic and academic success, which later I would describe as holistic development. And that really set me on the path. We were required to present our research at an academic conference. So I presented it at the 2000, was it the 2009 College Sport Research Institute Conference, which was in North Carolina that year. And I met my later to be advisor, PhD advisor, Dr. Billy Hawkins, who was a professor at the University of Georgia at the time. He had just republished his book, The New Plantation: Black Athletes, College Sports, and Predominantly White Institutions. So I went to Georgia to study under him. Did my dissertation work focused on black male student athlete experiences at historically black colleges and universities, and then started my faculty career at the University of Connecticut. Earned tenure there, expanded on my research agenda, and then I came to the University of Massachusetts Boston in 2019 to help build a brand new sport leadership and administration undergraduate program. And then 2 years ago, with the additional support from New Balance, we established the New Balance Institute for Innovative Leadership in Sport, which focuses on advancing research, education, and programming in the areas of sport equity, sport innovation, and sport performance and holistic wellness. So that's kind of the brief overview, and I'm happy to dig in more throughout the conversation.
No, so for those of you that are listening, Dr. Joseph Cooper, it's just amazing to see. I met you a long time ago. I want to say around like the 2010s, right? And just the amount of publications, where you are now, your research, your interests, just even hearing your backstory, right? And kind of like what led you to where you are now is just so inspiring in so many different ways. And for those of you that don't know, he's a really big player in the area of sport management, sports sociology, all things sports. And you're really kind of like the voice of our generation. That's how I think of it. And I'm a really big fan. I know came across the same timeline, but I'm just a huge fan of your work in every single way. So I feel like I'm being a fan person here right now. So I want you to tell me just a little bit, about being the director of the New Balance Institute for Innovative Leadership in Sport. How did that sponsorship occur, and kind of like what is your goal with all of that? Because that's a huge feather in your cap for having that as far as branding and sport management and, being the director, being a professor, doing a lot of the academic work behind that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dr. Butler. And the fandom is mutual. You know that I've been an admirer of you as a scholar, as a practitioner, as an advocate for social change in and through sport throughout our time. So the respect is mutual, and I know all of your audience members know how great you are. You've had an indelible impact on our field, and just a great person. The one thing I'll mention as it relates to what you were just saying, and then I'll answer your question. The one point that Dr. Butler mentioned, I had a graduate professor at the University of Georgia who said, research is me search. And what she was saying is that whatever research questions in any field, whether it's the medical profession, philosophy, political science, sociology, history, sport, psychology, we all, through our lived experiences and our socialization and our intersecting identities, in our political proclivities, our religious and spiritual backgrounds, we engage with the world in a constant, recursive manner. And there are a number of questions that all of us have. And as researchers, we're simply seeking to systematically explore different explanations for how and why certain things happen in the way they do. And for those of us who identify as critical sports scholars, we're looking specifically at how to address inequities that are reproduced in sport and ways in which we can be a part of transforming sport and therefore society for more equitable purposes. So I looked at that piece of advice from my professor, Dr. Betty St. Pierre, and I added kind of a African-centered approach to it and said research is we search and we as a collective. So the idea in many African diasporic groups and African traditions, the community is the center of our identity. So it doesn't mean that our individual identities don't matter, but it means that we're always interconnected, not only in a familial sense, but in a humanity sense. And so a lot of my research has been driven personally by my experiences in sport. So when my athletic career concluded, I had critical questions about why didn't I make it? Why do I feel so depressed that I didn't like what's going on here? And I started to realize it wasn't just about me. I was a part of a sociological apparatus, if you will. And I had to look at, where did I grow up? Why is sports so popular? Why are sports racialized and gendered? And, people with unique and adaptive abilities don't always have it. So I started asking a whole lot of questions, which led me down the path that I ended up going. But as it relates to the New Balance partnership, so I have to pay homage to a mentor of mine, Chancellor Emeritus Dr. J. Keith Motley, who was the chancellor at UMass Boston from 2007 to 2017, and Vice Chancellor Emeritus and former athletics director Charlie Titus, who they had the vision of creating a sport leadership and administration program at UMass Boston, which is the only four-year public university in the city of Boston. So if I say colleges and universities in Boston, people think of Boston University, Northeastern, they think of Harvard, they think of MIT, which those two are technically in Cambridge, but still in the greater Boston area. But they don't think as much. They may think of Brandeis, they may think of Boston College, Endicott, a number of other very prestigious private schools in the area. But UMass Boston is the only public university. So we're a part of the UMass system, which is also includes UMass Amherst, the flagship school, UMass Lowell, UMass Dartmouth, and the medical school as well. And so Dr. Motley, Chancellor Emeritus Motley, and Vice Chancellor Emeritus Titus, they approached New Balance with an idea of requesting an endowment gift to establish the program. And in 2017, New Balance agreed to provide a $5 million gift to create the program. I got hired in 2019 when the program actually launched. And after 6 years, every year I do biannual presentations to New Balance about our program. And they're always asking me, okay, how's the program doing? But what are some future directions that we could potentially invest in? And I made a presentation to them about creating an Institute for Innovative Leadership in Sport. And the inspiration behind it is actually a number of our mentors, Dr. Butler. So I think of like Dr. Richard Lapchick. I think of, Dr. Cheryl Cookie, Dr. Susan Burrell, Dr. Doug Hartman. I mean, so many folks who came before us who were involved in institutes like the Institute for Sport and Social Justice, the Muhammad Ali Center for Athletes and Social Change, the Institute for the Study of Sport and Social Change at San Jose State, which Dr. Akilah Carter-Francique used to be the director of, and Dr. Harry Edwards was one of the pioneers in influencing the establishment of that one. The Tucker Center for Women and Girls in Sport at the University of Minnesota. The Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport at the University of Central Florida, that Dr. Lapchick established, and then he also established the Northeastern Center for Sport and Society. And so all of these different institutes, obviously there are others that are non-academically centered, like the Aspen Institute. They do their project play reports on the state of youth sports. There's obviously the College Sport Research Institute, which is an academic one connected to the University of South Carolina now. So you and I came up at a time where a lot of these institutes were either just starting or they had been around, and seeing the impact of the industry facing work that they did, whether it's partnerships with professional sport organizations, whether it's reports, whether it's consulting. And I felt like we had a great opportunity. One, Boston being one of the sports capitals of the United States. You know, you got a lot of great, prominent professional sport organizations, a lot of colleges and universities, and a large number of sport-based youth development organizations. I thought about, what is a way in which we can be innovative and contribute in a comprehensive way. And I felt like if we were able to identify three pillars and connect with experts, faculty members, practitioners, graduate students who are interested in advancing the field in these areas, then we could be unique. And the goal would be is that we would have niche areas, which many centers and institutes have, but many institutes and centers kind of stay within a very focal niche area. So social justice would just be the focal area, or leadership. My colleague, Dr. Jennifer Hoffman, with the Center for Leadership that she does at the University of Washington. The College Sport Research Institute focuses on college sport in the United States. And I wanted us to have the bandwidth to look at sport from a multi-level approach. So youth, grassroots sport, community sport, interscholastic, intercollegiate, and professional, but also from a width standpoint that would allow us to transcend the boundaries of the United States so that we could do work internationally. And we actually are in the process of finalizing our first study abroad program in Colombia, South America. My colleague, Dr. Julian Alonso Restrepo, is leading that effort, and my colleague, Dr. Sushan Dai, is leading our global sport exchange programming. And so when I presented that to New Balance, they were excited, and they said, "Hey, how much would you need to get this started?" And I didn't want to be too ambitious, but I said, if we could get a $10 million endowment, that would allow us the bandwidth over multiple years to be able to advance in the areas of sport equity, sport innovation, and sport performance and holistic wellness. And they obliged. And so they provided that endowment gift in December of 2023. And so as of this December, the Institute will have been in existence for 2 years. We've done a number of research publications, we're in the process of developing our educational curriculum and certificates that focus on innovative leadership in sport, mental health and sport performance, as well as an inclusive excellence certificate, and as well as building out our study abroad and international programming. And then we've had a number of events. So we just finished co-sponsoring with the Positive Coaching Alliance and the Boston Public Schools, the first ever Boston Coaches Symposium. And we touched on a number of areas, eligibility, NIL, mental health, eating disorders, post-athletic career transition for athletes, and leadership more broadly. So next year here in the greater Boston area, the Men's World Cup will be in the area. I believe there are going to be 8 games played at Gillette Stadium. So we're going to be having our students working at the event, but also doing some critical analysis of mega events and human rights violations that are typically associated with those events, whether it's the laborers who are building the facilities. Also, a prominent issue around mega events is human trafficking. It's very unfortunate, but it is a major issue. And how do we heighten awareness about that and work with law enforcement and other authorities to ensure the safety of everyone connected to the event and beyond? So they put their trust in us, and we're building together a great team. We're very excited about the work that we have done up to this point. Last October, we published the first, to my knowledge, National Black Sport Participation and Physical Activity Report. So there have been a number of youth sport reports that have been published that include multiple racial groups and gender groups and social classes, but it's typically aggregated data that's presented out. What we did was we did a secondary data analysis of those reports and disaggregated it based on race, as well as gender and when possible social class, and saw some, some troubling trends around the lack of access to quality physical activity and sporting opportunities for youth, which is most pronounced at the ages of 6 through 12. And typically by the time Black adolescents advance to high school, because there are more school sponsored sports, the participation rates go up. But at the youth level, the younger levels, we see what we call the sport opportunity, this opportunity gap in sport participation to be the most pronounced. So yeah, so that's just a little overview of how we got to the point with the institute and kind of some of the future directions that we're trying to go in.
I mean, my mind is blown right now. Number one, they picked the perfect person to direct all of this. And just, I mean, the fact that you came on in 2019 and this is 2025, and how much you have done in this short period of year. Plus, I mean, you're a father of four, beautiful girls, and like an amazing husband. So it's like all these stacked on your resume. I mean, I'm just so impressed by this, and I'm just so excited to follow this program. Last year, I was able to come up to UMass Boston and be a part of your speaker series, and just to see the energy of your program and the students and just the professional development and the fact that you're going to take this international, I'm super excited for you. So, congrats on everything you're doing. New Balance, if you're out there, if you're listening, you picked the right person for this. And just looking at that report from 2019 to 2029, I'm excited to see it, and I need to see that template because I'm like, hey, maybe we need to bring something down here, right? So, thank you so much for just explaining all that, where you've been, where you are now, where you're going. And I feel that's just aligned with where we need to be, right? We can't think domestically anymore. We need to think more globally, more internationally, create that sense of awareness, and sport gives us that opportunity to connect on so many different ways. And you're really living through your lived experiences, and you're really sharing that with everyone. So thank you. So I'm going to move on to another question. Your area of research, and you touched on this already, right, revolves around sport, education, culture. Specifically, you have some very high profile peer reviewed papers that are focused on race and ethnicity in sport. Can you just tell us a little bit about some of those papers that you have written that I've cited because I love reading your work? But most importantly, you have this one paper that I think has just really been your, I don't know how to say it, like it's really just branded you, right, as the person to come to when you talk about race, ethnicity, culture, sociology of sport. But it's entitled Race and Resistance: A Typology of African American Sport Activism. And I've cited this, and a lot of other people have, but just the typology of that also. Can you kind of walk us through that and what that means to be a scholar that's focused again on race, ethnicity, culture, and then specifically this paper?
Absolutely, Dr. Butler. Uh, my research career, as I mentioned before, when I was doing my master's, I started out looking at black male. At the time, I was using the term black male student athletes at a predominantly Division I, predominantly white institution, and looking at critical success factors that impacted their academic and athletic success. So I was looking at personal development, social harmony, engagement with a strong support system, career aspirations, time management skills, and engagement with spirituality and religion. So at that time, I was looking at the relationship between race, sport participation, and educational outcomes and holistic development. As my work evolved, and this is what I want all your audience members to, one takeaway point is that evolution is important on a personal level as well as on a collective level. And look at your journey as a part of your evolution. There are certain things. So the article that Dr. Butler mentioned around race and resistance, that paper would not have been what it became without my journey. And I could not have written that paper in 2009, 2010, 2000. So just be patient with yourself and your journey, that there are a number of things. I look at it like a constellation. There are a number of things that are within your control and even outside of your control that are going to influence your trajectory moving forward. So earlier in my career, I primarily situated myself within kind of the sport education area. So I looked at academic, athletic, and social experiences of Black, initially just Black male student athletes, and I later started using the term Black male college athletes to, to highlight how the term student athlete originated by Walter Byers, the former president of NCAA, for exploitative purposes to prevent college athletes from filing for workers' compensation. But then I also started using the term holistic athletes. And so I was on that trajectory looking at Black holistic college athletes' experiences at historically Black colleges and universities, at historically white colleges and universities, at Division I, II, and III institutions. So that's where I was going. And in 2016, two things happened that propelled me in the direction of the race and resistance piece. So I'd already been well versed in the kind of the history of the Black athlete. Obviously, my advisor, Dr. Hawkins, was very, knowledgeable in that area. I had read Bill Rhoden's $40 Million Slaves book, The Rise, Fall, and the Redemption of the Black Athlete. I read work around Gary Sales and others. But Colin Kaepernick took a knee. Dr. Harry Edwards spoke at the NAS, the North American Society of the Sociology of Sport conference in Tampa, Florida, which I know you're very familiar with that area.
Yeah, we were
And
there. I was
during
there for that. Yeah, I
You were
think
there
I
for
was
that.
sat next
And
to you.
when Dr. Edwards spoke, he presented his four waves. It's five waves now, but at that time he had four waves of Black athlete activism. And he talked about the first wave from the early 1900s to the early 1940s. He talked about from 1946 when 1947 when Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in men's Major League Baseball, to the early 1960s. He did the 1960s to the early 1970s. And then he said there was a period of stagnation of Black athlete activism from the mid 1970s all the way up to the early 2000s. And then there was the recent era during the Black Lives Matter movement, or the movement for Black Lives. And I was very inspired by both what Kaepernick did and what Dr. Harry Edwards was saying. And I was meeting with one of my PhD students at the time, and we would have our weekly meetings. And he suggested that Colin Kaepernick was the modern day Muhammad Ali. And I told him, I said, I don't know if it's quite to that extent. And we had a 3 hour conversation about what were the similarities and differences between Kaepernick and Muhammad Ali, the time periods that they existed, the actual stances that they were taking. So Muhammad Ali's anti-colonial stance, Colin Kaepernick's anti-police brutality, Muhammad Ali identifying with the Nation of Islam and Muslims, and denying or declining to go into the Vietnam War, and then Colin Kaepernick later being more a prison abolitionist, calling for the abolition of prisons. And in that conversation, we ended up jotting down ideas about different types of activism, because essentially we were saying all activism isn't the same, all activism isn't effective in the same way, and everything that disrupts a status quo isn't activism. So we pondered on it. Beyond that conversation, we sketched out, and the race and resistance paper, the typology of African American support activism, is a byproduct of that evolution of thinking about how do people like Kaepernick and Serena Williams and Wilma Rudolph and Jackie Robinson and Joe Louis and Jesse Owens and all these different folks, Naomi Osaka and Raven Saunders and Gwen Berry, like what the WNBA players and their actions compared to the NBA players and their actions. And so we came up with an initial one thing that we wanted to do was come up with an operational definition for activism. And it wasn't to be elitist as like, oh, faculty members get or researchers get to develop. But we said in order for us to really like examine, if you were in the medical field, if they were trying to identify an illness, they have to delineate what is pneumonia from what is a cancer, and then what is a different type of cancer. So we felt like in the field, the terms like activism, resistance, um, uh, there were just a number of terms that were being deployed, but seldom defined. So we were like, well, if everything's activism, nothing's not activism. And so we ended up saying for activism, we felt like five criteria had to be met. One, there had to be a clear disruption to a status quo. So if you took a knee in your personal bathroom, that's not disrupting anything because it's your bathroom. Nobody's watching you. So if you take a knee in a football game before the national anthem, that's going to disrupt it. So that's one. Number two, it has to challenge like a dominant status quo. So not only is it a disruption, but it's contrary to something that currently exists. So when the U.S. women's national team was filing a lawsuit for equal pay, that was challenging the idea that men deserve higher pay, regardless of performance, regardless of revenue. It's just we accept that men get more money. So there has to challenge the status quo. The third thing is that there has to be concrete demands expressed in it, like a specific aim. So you can't just say something is bad. You have to say, in order to make it better, this is what would need to be done. The fourth thing is that it has to be for a collective aim. So it can't just be an individual thing. So if Kaepernick was taking a knee and said, I want something for me, that would be more like an individual act versus saying, hey, I want something for people like me and people who experience it. And then the fourth thing is that we felt like it had to connect with a broader social movement. And so, or the fifth thing that it has to connect to a broader social movement. So we said, okay, once we got that criteria, we said, okay, pioneering, agency, advocacy, allyship, these are things that under certain conditions could be activism, but not inherently. So we call those borderline activist actions. And then we said, okay, what are some of the different ways that we feel like activism has appeared in and through sport? And we said in and through intentionally in that article because there are certain types of activism which we call sport-based activism, which were designed to change the culture, policies, and practices within sport. So Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier, Venus Williams advocating for equal pay in tennis at the Wimbledon tennis tournament in 2007. Those are examples of sport-based activism. Colin Kaepernick, Muhammad Ali, the WNBA protests during the BLM movement, those are activism through sport because they were using their platform in sport to advocate for broader social change. Obviously, the 1968 Olympics, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, activism through sport. And so we said, okay, one type of activism is symbolic. And we said that's when there is a protest in a public manner. We said the next type was sport based, right? So, like activism that's trying to change a particular environment in sport. Then we said there has to be scholarly activism. So we wanted to pay homage to Dr. Harry Edwards. A lot of our predecessors who were really advancing fields like sports sociology, social issues in sport. Your books. You pay homage to people who inspired you, and you yourself are engaged in what we would call scholarly activism. The fourth one we said was economic activism. So it's this idea of either diverting resources from an exploitative system or investing resources in a system that is more empowering or liberatory or non-exploitative, if you will. And then the other one that we said was like grassroots activism. And then we later expanded it grassroots and mass mobilization, which is a form of activism in creating formal organizations. The Olympic Project for Human Rights, the National College Players Association. We would even argue the Tucker Center for Women and Girls in Sport. Those are efforts that, depending on if it's a proximal change or if it's more kind of international or interstate, would be considered mass mobilization. So that was the initial typology. We continue to think deeper and built out the media activism, political activism, legal activism, music and art activism, military activism, and then later fashion and religious activism. So the whole idea was to figure out how do we define what's activism and what's not. Just because it's not activism doesn't mean that it cannot contribute to positive social change. So there are a number of borderline activist actions, advocacy, interpersonal relationships, interest convergence. There are a lot of things that have advanced the plight of marginalized groups. But we also wanted to say that just because it did that doesn't mean that it was inherently activism. And then we wanted to highlight the different types of activism and the ways in which um, they contributed to change. So that piece is really important to me for multiple levels. One, um, it enabled me and my colleagues to pay homage to the work of, we really wanted to build on not just Dr. Harry Edwards's four waves, but as you mentioned, you and I are a part of a genealogy of sports scholars that we're a part of a legacy, right? And we want to make sure that within our time on Earth and in the profession that we're advancing ideas and advancing impact in ways that pays homage to those that came before. So first, it was special to me because we were able to pay homage. Second, it was special to me because it was created in a collective space. Like it started with going to NAS, talking to colleagues, it then coming back to my campus, talking with my doc students, and it just became this larger conversation around what is activism and how do you do it. And then fourthly, it really pulled me back. As I mentioned earlier, I started kind of in the sport education space, which is important. But sport education is a social justice issue in and of itself. But this allowed me to really get back to my sociological roots and have a broader impact with my scholarship that I could not have predicted prior to all of those events happening. Right. Like I knew that at some point I was going to try to do it. It led to the writing of my first book, From Exploitation Back to Empowerment, Black Male Holistic Underdevelopment Through Sport and Miseducation, and then subsequent works that came from that. So those three reasons are really why that piece is special to me. And then the race and resistance point is really highlighting how not just Black people, but any racialized group that has been mistreated based on the color of their skin, their physical features, their culture, their belief, that there's an essence in us which um, uh, gosh, it's coming to me. There's a book called Black Marxism. Dr. Cedric Robinson, he calls the ontological totality. And what he's talking about is that there's something within our state of being intergenerationally that strives for human dignity, that strives for social harmony, that strives for justice, that strives for peacefulness, even amidst living in colonial, exploitative, like just very difficult circumstances because there are certain people who are trying to create hierarchies to extract resources and to keep inequalities and inequities in place. And the race and resistance really kind of communicates the essence of that ability to strive for the best version of humanity intergenerationally. Like it's something that has been going on well before we were alive. It'll go on well after we're not here. And so I was really appreciative to be a part of a constellation of efforts during that time period, including your outstanding book, Social Issues in Sport, that are advancing our field in very contemporary and meaningful ways.
No, absolutely. And this article cited in that. So that's why this is great that you're elaborating more on that. And I love how you talk about the constellations, right? And how they have aligned. And so the trajectory as far as, talking about the typology of African American sport activism and just kind of going through that. And then, you're making me reflect, and it's very nostalgic when we were in Tampa, Florida, and listening to Dr. Harry Edwards. And for those of you that don't know about Dr. Harry Edwards, he was the architect for the 1968 Black Power salute with Tommy Smith, John Carlos, and Peter Norman, which a lot of people Peter Norman out of that, but he was the Australian that said, "Hey, guess what? I'm going to be an ally to the cause, and I want to bring attention to what's going on in Australia." So, when we talk about athlete activism, right now we're, talking about race and sport. And we're talking primarily about African American athletes right here in the United States. But, we have to think too, like globally as well, which you touched on. And we have to also think about the allyship that goes along with that because, who are we without our allies? So looking at that in the broader sense, but just looking at those different waves of athlete activism, and that brings me to my next question. You've elaborated a lot on athlete activism, but the past, the present, what does the future look like? And we're not fortune tellers, right? But you've added on to the wave. You've helped to define that as far as the typology goes. And then we wrote an article together looking through the lens of the added value theory. And I feel like, based on what you told me, hey, what's this theoretical framework you're starting to develop right now that I need to start citing because just understanding how scholars work through the process of looking at what's going on in society, looking at history, looking at individuals that really have changed the tide of things, and looking at a different lens as far as how do we interpret this? How do we define that? What does it look like now? And how does it look, moving forward? What has, what have you been able to kind of see from your perspective as far as kind of the future of athlete activism, where we are now and kind of like maybe the direction we're headed? And I know that's a hard question, but just want
No, it's a great question. So a couple points. So to the point around the global impact of sport in society, I want to give a shout out to our colleagues, Dr. Yannick Kluk and a colleague of ours, Rory McGrath. So Dr. Kluk, Rory, and myself, we are working on an edited book called A Handbook of Global Sport Activism, which will include Rory actually published a couple years ago an edited book called Athlete Activism. And it included, I believe, over 30 chapters of scholars who wrote about, as you just mentioned, Dr. Butler, athlete activism from different geographical regions by different groups of people. So not just African American athletes. So I just want to give that shout out. As it relates to the future, so there's a couple things that I think about. So Dr. Harry Edwards, and he added to his four waves of Black athlete activism, and he said the fifth wave will focus on Black women. So that was his hypothesis and his prediction. In that same vein, I do believe future um, uh, activist efforts in and through sport will be more cross-gender collaborative. Up until this point, women have played a pronounced role in sport activism, but have not received the media coverage or the scholarly attention for their contributions. And I believe moving forward, you're going to see a shift in that. Obviously, the recent book by Dr. Leticia Ingracio Cardoso Brown around Black feminism in sport and the idea of centering Black women's perspectives in sport. Very good book. That's something that I see to be the future. And then even in my own work, there are two theories that I've been developing. One is a resistance typology that includes the categories of agency, pioneering, advocacy and allyship, hybridity, activism, social movements, revolutions, and sustained empowerment. So the idea that resistance happens on a continuum and in different ways and in different scales. And then most recently in my Black Sporting Resistance book, I put out this Black Sporting Resistance framework, which looks at diaspora, transnationalism, and internationalism. And I believe that the analysis globally of different diasporic groups, the impact of transnational experiences, so the exchanges and flows. I mean, if you look at a site like the Caribbean region, so you've got Trinidad and Tobago, you got Barbados, you got the Dominican Republic, you got Cuba, you got Puerto Rico, you got
Guyana.
you got Guyana, you got Grenada, you got St. Kitts. I mean, you've got a number of of islands and cultures and people that are a byproduct of hybridity, right? This idea that there are multiple exchanges, languages spoken, music developed, lived experiences, obviously, in colonial regimes and neo-colonial regimes, even in kind of what we would call in maroon or marronage settings where groups were able to separate as best as possible from an exploitative reality. So I believe the future, not only will it be more cross-gender, but it'll be more cross-national, more international, and more global. I think another future direction of it will be technologically based. And I think, we've seen a lot of that with the hashtag BLM movement, the hashtag Me Too movement. I think with the social media platforms and the ways in which the world is flattening due to the way that we can communicate across digital platforms and digital spaces, I think that that will be a pronounced issue. I also see that this kind of false myth of sport and politics being separated. I think the future will show that sport is inherently political. So, there are a lot of activist spaces, and I've been fighting this fight for a while with our comrades in the activist world that don't take sport seriously. Like they view sport as entertainment, as leisure. They don't even view sport as a serious political space. Even when you bring up examples like Tommy Smith and John Carlos and Colin Kaepernick, they kind of downplay it. And I think the future of sport of activism and resistance in and through sport is that sport will take a more pronounced role in labor movements, in human rights movements, in immigrant rights movements, in health disparity conversations, in human trafficking. Like that, it's not that sport has nothing to do with any of these areas. And I see that we're going to continue to break down these, in some ways, arbitrary disciplinary lines that we draw. So I know you and I are well versed in, oh, you're a sports sociologist, so you can't know anything about psychology, or you can't know anything about economics, or you can't know. And it's like, well, we're all studying social phenomena, right? Like whether it's in the environment. Well, so why do we kind of create this hierarchy or these bifurcations of who can contribute to the advancement of knowledge? And so I think a bold prediction would be that the future of active sport will be non-disciplinary. We talk about interdisciplinary a lot, but I would say non-disciplinary, that you're going to see conversations happen, coalitions built not only across people from different cultural backgrounds, different political backgrounds, but different academic backgrounds. And I'm hoping that the Institute for Innovative Leadership in Sport could be a leader in this area, in that we don't emphasize the specialty or expertise of one particular kind of aspect of sports studies. But we basically elevate and highlight the value of various analysis, anthropologically, biologically, astrophysically, engineering wise, environmentally. I mean, there's so many different areas that impact how these systems function. And if we could just get out of the kind of traditional way that only certain disciplines can speak on certain things, I think that will contribute to the advancement of creating new systems that are more equitable and creating new schemas in our minds of what's possible. So this radical imagination, I know some of our colleagues are into the surrealism, the Afrofuturism, and I kind of see that kind of coming into our space too, and helping us to reimagine how do we even define sport. The last point that I'll mention that just came to me thinking about technology, but I also think that there'll be a recommitment to the indigenous ways of thinking, doing, and being. I can't, like you said, I don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict what that'll look like, but I just have a feeling, just given the cyclical nature of humanity, that there's going to be a point that we're going to commit back to certain knowledge and ways of living and being that our ancestors knew and did, that as we evolved the industrial revolution, the technology, we kind of felt like those things don't are not as relevant to us anymore. And I imagine that there are a number of us that will reconsider that and say, well, maybe our ancestors knew certain things that are better than what we're doing now. Like if you look at a lot of the illnesses that we suffer, a lot of our ancestors did not have them, right? So that means that there's something about the way we're processing food, the way that we're living our lives, the with all of the buildings, like the pollution and the way that we're degrading the environment, that all of that is not progressive. Like we automatically think more buildings, more sports, more this, like more is better. And I think our ancestors remind us it's not about the quantity, but more so about the quality of our existence. And so I don't know exactly what that'll look like, but I think that'll be a part of our future as well.
No, definitely. I mean, I think you really, hit the button on the international perspective. And thank you for, talking a little bit about the publications, the different books that are out there, and just kind of with athlete activism and here in the United States and how it's inspired a global movement, and how that movement really has resonated with so many different marginalized communities all over the world, and kind of circling back around and then talking to about how that will influence, the indigenous cultures everywhere, right? And I think sport, you brought up the fact that, some scholars really try to be like, hey, you're talking about people playing basketball, leisure, recreation, but not really understanding the intersectionality of race, of migration, of disability in sport, of class, and just, in economics and the physiology and the kinesiology aspect of it, right? And what is interesting about sport, and also to looking at sport and studying it as a scholar, you do what's different about this than, let's say, a discipline like, I don't know, accounting or chemistry. And I'm not trying to knock any of these, right? But sport is so visual. So everybody that's participating in sport, either from a spectator point of view or from a participatory point of view, playing it, they have their own lived experiences, and with that comes their own opinion and their own perspective, whereas we're not necessarily going to have a perspective on something like an occupation that deals with like accounting or something that's a little bit more office. So sport brings a lot of emotion, it brings a lot of passion, it brings a lot of opinions, and with that it brings a lot of different people from around the globe, and a lot of culture and diversity, and having these conversations. So I think you hit the nail on the head with that one, and I'm excited to see with what you come up with next. And I want to be a part of those conversations. I want to be in those rooms because it's just so important to understand that from all these different aspects. And you have that institutional knowledge, and you've done the work, and you've looked at the history, and you've had these critical, really hard conversations to bring us to where we are now. So, thank you for that. So, with that being said, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest social issues that revolve around race, ethnicity, and sport? And with that, how can we move towards finding a solution for these? I mean, we're not going to solve racism in one day, or, this is part of a larger conversation, right? But, what do you feel are some of the most critical issues right now we are facing when we do talk about race and sport specifically?
Yeah, no, that's a big question. And I mean, without getting just kind of overly esoteric with it, I mean, capitalism, imperialism, fascism, sexism,
All
xenophobia, there's just a number of isms and ideologies and systems that are particularly in the current moment in 2025, that are supercharged, to say the least. And those, because the roots of many of those ideologies are rooted in my personal opinion, in the myth that certain groups of humans are superior to others. I think that we've got to continue to unlearn and relearn and learn new ways of how we exist as humans, to be quite honest with you, because I think at least conservatively for the past 400 years, and many could probably date it back further than that, there's just been mass miseducation around what is the expected and aspirational manifestation of humanity. So we've gotten to a point to where we've got more food and water on planet Earth to feed people multiple times over, all human beings multiple times over, but we've got mass poverty. We've got mass people dying of not just starvation, but of lack of quality access to quality water. Speaking from the country that we're a part of, there have been numerous reports that there are more firearms, more guns than there are human beings, like, American citizens. And so that's a problem, right? Like when we are producing more tools that are designed to take life away than there are actual human beings that are intended to create life. As it relates to racism, I mean, I think some of the common, I mentioned capitalism, but just like the economic exploitation and the stratification, that there's a lot of wealth, that is concentrated, and there are a number of laborers and people who just don't have access to that. So I think that the obviously the political economy, so the economic stratification is one major aspect of. Related to that is the political, divisiveness and the political underrepresentation and overrepresentation of certain groups. So, for example, speaking of African Americans specifically, we constitute roughly, even if you include African Americans who are descendants of African people who were enslaved in the United States, and more recent immigrant groups who also identify across the African diaspora. I think roughly 13 to 14% of the U.S. population. But if you look across the United States, we're concentrated in certain states and regions, right? So when you look at the electoral map, you're not able to see that political representation in that regard. So I think the political aspect is another aim of it. The other piece, as I mentioned, is the educational dynamic. I mean, right now there's an attack on the Smithsonian Museum of African American Culture and History that is literally trying to erase the history of an entire group of people. So I think that's not only an attack on African Americans, I think that's an attack even on a number of Euro American groups that their histories and ethnicities are not fully honored in the prominent narratives of our society. Obviously, there's an attack on women's rights. Black maternal mortality rates are at a high, and the health disparities that impact Black women and Black girls and even Black gender non-binary conforming people is high. So there's the health intersection of it. So there's education and health, and then there's environmental health in that regard, where people live. So, when we think about Hurricane Katrina, when we think about a number of other natural disasters that have hit various parts of the United States and even globally, typically the most marginalized and the most vulnerable groups in those areas are racialized groups. So the environmental racism is a major issue as well. So I look at I started with the conversation around fascism, imperialism, colonialism, capitalism, and sexism and xenophobia, but it really spills into economic exploitation and stratification, political disenfranchisement, under and overrepresentation, miseducation, health disparities or structural violence through healthcare or a lack thereof, and then the environmental degradation, and environmental racism. So there's so many other areas. Religious freedoms are being infringed upon. Sexual identity freedom people having the ability to love who they want to love without being harmed. So those are some other intersecting areas that are impacting racism as well.
No, thank you so much for talking about that because this is part of a bigger conversation, right? And it sounds like another typology, if you ask me. But one of the reasons we do talk about race and sport, and every time that I have this conversation with my students, a lot of people do this. They look down at the ground. And I always say, we're going to get comfortable being uncomfortable because these are the conversations that we have to have. And we want to be in a space and we want to live in a place where we could have these conversations and we can have disagreements and we have just different perspectives. But at the end of the day, we are communicating and we are understanding our lived experiences, our histories, where we are and where we're going. With that being said, in 2020, that's kind of where we were at a place with very heightened emotions about what was going on, and everything came to a boiling point. On March 11th, the NBA stopped playing in 2020 because of COVID-19 and the pandemic. And that was the catalyst, as far as I'm concerned, right? And a lot of people, because sports is so visual, that was a catalyst about like, wait, what's going on? Why do we have to stop this game? Why is everyone going home? And everybody started to take this virus very seriously at that point, right? So sports stopped at that point. And then August 23rd, Jacob Blake and police brutality happened in August 23rd, 2020, and sports stopped again. So when we talk about sociology of sports, social issues, race, and sport, you have to understand that these two events that happened in 2020, they stopped sport. And then they also put notice to everybody around the world, hey, what's going on? So when we talk about sport sociology, sport management, and a lot of times people want to separate the two, like they are not, connected, but they are a marriage between one another. Because when you don't have players that are not willing to play because of what's going on, because of social issues, social injustices that need to be addressed, then that becomes a business issue. That becomes a situation where you have a multi-billion-dollar industry that everybody wants to, watch sports and see these players, see these leagues, watch their teams, and then all of a sudden, hey, what's going on? That's why we have to have these conversations because we don't want it to get to that boiling point where everybody's like, I don't understand what's going on. We need to understand, we need to have that awareness, we need to have that situational awareness, and we need to be able to have these conversations based on facts and based on openness, and also too based on the fact that, hey, we're not going to get in trouble or hurt somebody's feelings because we are having these conversations. And again, let's get comfortable being uncomfortable because we don't want to get to a place where we don't talk to each other, we don't like each other because we have a difference in opinion, or we don't agree, or we don't do that, or we don't want to base anything off of history and facts. So I think you really hit the nail on the head with that. So we're coming to the end of our conversation, and it's been so fruitful in so many ways. So I just want to ask you just a couple more questions. Um, do you have any Well, you've named a number of books and articles, but about learning more about social issues, more about race and ethnicity, more about athlete and activism, conferences, publications, scholars to follow. Can you just kind of touch on that as we get to the end of this?
Absolutely. So I know I mentioned a few. Shout out to Dr. Nalani Butler is the first one I would mention. So if you haven't copped social issues in sport, definitely do that. And just the forthcoming work as well. There's just so many folks. I don't want to leave anybody out. Like to say the one that first comes to mind, Dr. Letitia Ingracio Cardoso Brown. I believe her book "Say Her Name," which focuses on Black feminism and Black women in sport. My colleague Dr. Yannick Kluk is doing great work around activism and human rights in sport. Like I said, the book that we have coming out is a handbook of global sport activism. Um, non-sport related, I think the work of Dr. Gerald Horn. He's a historian at the University of Houston. He wrote the foreword for my Black Sporting Resistance book, and has just been a major influence on my thinking as a scholar. I think he's published over 50 books by this point. He's very prolific and has written about a range of topics like globally. I feel like he's written about um, social and political phenomena on every continent on the earth. Um, who else? Just some folks. Dr. Cheryl Cookie, her book Fair or Foul, and Stanley Edson. Their recent edition just came out. Dr. Janelle Joseph. She's been doing work on Afro-Caribbean, not only cricket players, but she's done some research on capoeira as well. Dr. Munene Waniki. I believe he's a professor at Western Carolina University. And he wrote a book called The Black Migrant Athlete, looking at media depictions in sport. Um, Dr. Brandon Wallace, he's done some work on Colin Kaepernick's Know Your Right campaign, his grassroots activism efforts. So, no, he's coming out with some work. Dr. Joseph L. Herman II. He's doing work on narrative, identity, and liminality. So he calls it the other NIL. So most people think NIL, name, image, and likeness. He's looking at narrative, identity, and liminality. So he's doing some great work. Uh, Gosh, I just don't want to forget anybody. My former doc students, want to shout them out. Dr. Ajane Keaton.
Oh man,
Uh,
you have such a great doc.
yep.
She's awesome.
Yeah, she's great. Dr. Charles McCauley, Dr. Donald McCauley, Dr. Michael Mallory, Dr. Max Klein, Dr. Akuma Wadike. I mean, they're doing great work as well. So, and then, a lot of our mentors are still doing great work. Dr. John Singer, his book, Race, Sport, and Education, looking at Black males. Another one of our contemporaries, Dr. Jonathan Howe. Just published a book on Black male athletes and self-presentation. Uh, Dr. Billy Hawkins, my advisor, is continuing to do good work. He's got a handbook coming out on North American sports, a handbook on North American sports. Um, so yeah, those are a few that come to mind. I know Dr. C.K. Harrison, C. Keith Harrison, he's coming out with a book on I think Black sports scholars, and I think another one on hip hop and sport.
Yeah, I
So
just talked to him. Yeah.
yeah, he's been a pioneer in that space with hip hop and sport. In that regard, I definitely just want to give a shout out to um, the new press that we established here through the Institute of Innovative Leadership in Sport. It's through UMass Press, University of Massachusetts Press, and it's called Sport for Social Change. So that's a book series. So if anyone in the audience, if you're looking, you don't have to be an academic. If you're looking to publish a book, please check us out. Sport for Social Change book series. I know that there was another, I think it's sport and either sport and politics or sport and political power. The University of Oklahoma, they have a book series that they publish. The University of Kentucky has a race and sport book series. University of Illinois, I think they have and Rutgers University have critical issues in sport series or sport and society series that they publish as well. So those are a couple that I think I want to shout out my colleague Dr. Ariane Waite, who's been doing really innovative work in data science in sport and education. So how to cultivate the data scientist identities within athletes. She's also been advocating for legitimizing athletic participation as an educational area. So yeah, those are the few that come to mind. I know there's some others that are going to come to me as soon
Yeah.
as we end, but
Yeah.
feel
Please.
free for those of you who are interested in these topics, feel free to reach out to me. Joseph Cooper at UMass Boston. My email is my name, Joseph N as in Nancy Cooper at umb.edu. You can also reach out to Dr. Butler. She and I are close colleagues. So, if you have a question for her and or for me, we could respond to you with the resources necessary. But yeah, those are just some recommended readings. Those scholars are doing really good work. There's so many others that I know I'm missing, but obviously Dr. Jay Coakley, he and Dr. Jeffrey Montez de Orca continue to do the sport and uh, the sport and society book, Controversy and Issues book. There are volumes of that, and then just so many others. But hopefully that was a useful list for those in the audience to kind of do some preliminary reading on, and I hope you are inspired and continue to contribute in your own way as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So great list, great group of scholars, and lots of reading ahead, everyone. I want you guys to read these books, including myself. I'm really excited because I'm like, what's going on? I'm about to rewind this and write all these books down. So, FYI, definitely reach out if you are interested, which I know I'm going to get some emails. But that about wraps up our interview today. With that being said, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, no, just thank you so much, Dr. Butler, for, being you, the great work you're doing. Thank you, audience, for listening. I know we're living in perilous political times, but I'll leave you all with a quote that I just shared with a number of groups that I've interacted with here over the past couple of years is the struggle continues, the mission is the same, and the struggle is protracted. So regardless of who's in political office, regardless of some of the attacks that are being levied, I think it's really important that we have a strong commitment to human rights. We have a strong commitment to cross-cultural solidarity and coalition building. We don't need to be divisive unnecessarily. I do think it's important that we do draw some lines at some point um, you know, when it comes to, respecting human rights and, we've got to, in order to change the systems, we've got to acknowledge what about current systems are causing harm. So if there is a disagreement, I do think there's ways that we can, as you mentioned earlier, civilly disagree. I think we all have colleagues that we look at things a little bit differently, but at least if we can identify some areas of agreement and work together to reduce harm in that way, I think that would be the best way. So just have a spirit of continuous improvement, personally and collectively, and then draw strength from our ancestors. I know, as a person who's a descendant of people who were enslaved in perpetuity, I have nothing to complain about whatever the plight that I'm experiencing in life right now. I think it's important that we honor their legacies by using our talents, our gifts, our resources, our relationships to improve humanity in whatever way we can. It is a struggle for a reason. There's not everybody doesn't want the world to be a better place in that way. Certain people would prefer for the current harms to remain forever. So, kind of in sync with my Black internationalist kind of orientation. I'm against war. I'm against, sexism, against colonialism, against, racism, against ableism. I believe that a better humanity is possible. I see it all the time in pockets of the world. We just have to amplify it, and we have to be able to confront entities that are seeking to divide people more than bring us together, and seeking to harm people in ways that are not, and harm the environment as well in ways that are not beneficial for our current humanity, let alone future generations of humanity. So, kind of the old cliche, let's try to leave the world a little bit better than it was when we came into it. And if we all kind of adopt that mantra, I do think that we'll make some lasting change that will be valued by those who we touch in this lifetime and after.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's great advice, and I think we all should take that to heart, right? We don't want to do irreparable damage to the world for our kids, for our grandkids, for the next generation of people, right? And we want to have these conversations that revolve around these topics that, again, are critical issues, that are sensitive topics, but we have to understand that we all come from very different walks of life, and that is a beautiful thing. And let's come together, let's have these conversations. And I'm just so happy I got to have this conversation with you today. So, for those tuning in, thank you so much for just being a part of this conversation. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. So, see you all later.